Next, I'm hoping that I pronounce this correctly. Please correct me if I don't. It's Helen and David Slottje. Close? Okay. David and Helen are attorneys with Community Environmental Defense Council, Incorporated, a public interest environmental law firm based here in Ithaca. CEDC does not charge its clients and relies entirely on donations and grants for funding and its expenses. The Slottjes have been working around the state to help communities protect their rural character and tranquility by assisting communities in passing bans on gas drilling. So we've all heard that's what we need to go to our town boards for, so hopefully you'll give us some good advice. Please welcome Don and Helen, or David and Helen, excuse me.
So it looks like David's decided to remain in the audience, but that's all right. So my name again is Helen Slottje, and David and I are attorneys with Community Environmental Defense Council. And we are here to talk about, sorry, just trying to get my thing up here. So we're here today, or at least I'm here today, to talk about how we can fight fracking at the local level. So the, all right, so the first thing that we would like to do is to thank our sponsors, Jeff and Jody. We wouldn't be here without their great efforts to get this organized and come up with such a terrific lineup of speakers. And secondly, this is educational advice, not legal advice. Don't try this at home. All right, so I thought we'd start out with what has been happening at other levels, the federal and state level, and why we've concluded that the best place for us to act is at the local level. So well, that didn't come out too well. All right, so on the draft supplemental generic environmental impact statement, the DEC does seem to be working towards its July 1 internal deadline. We have no idea sort of if there'll be a comment period beyond 30 days and what sort of public hearings they might have. So that's sort of this ongoing elephant in the room. The best strategy that we think as far as dealing with this is flooding the DEC with additional comments based on newly found evidence to sort of tie up the process and highlight why they really shouldn't be trying to issue this anytime soon. There's more evidence, or there's more information on that at Walter Hang's website, toxicstargeting.com, and those sorts of efforts, sending in lots and lots of comments, I think will be quite helpful. So what about the 2011 legislative session? Victories? None. The industry victory, we think that the water withdrawal bill that passed, despite being supported by national environmental groups, was a victory for industry and a real loss for the people of the state. We did have some good signs. Barbara Lifton's home rule bill got passed in the Assembly. A similar bill did not pass in the Senate, although one was sponsored by Seward, so that's at least, you know, a modicum of good showing, but certainly no victories at the legislative session. The EPA. Sometimes it seems like perhaps they're moving in the right direction. They're not totally beholden to industry, but on the other hand, Obama's national energy policy still seems to be very tied to natural gas. And Lisa Jackson was recently spouting word for word some of industry's favorite lines. So again, not a whole lot of hope that we feel with that. So what about federal legislation? So the FRAC Act was reintroduced this legislative session, but the Republicans hold control of the House. So probably not a lot of good news coming out of there. So what happened when we looked at all this? We said, well, we believe the real focus has to be on local action, that trying to pass local laws that prohibit, ban industrial activity, gas drilling, that's really the only place where we're going to be able to affect immediate and significant control and achieve some real victories. So how does one do this? Well, the We think it starts with citizen education, engagement, organization, getting local groups on the ground in your town. Then once you have that sort of base of support, demonstrating that to your local leaders through petitioning, surveys, and the like, presenting that overwhelming community support to your local board, and then getting a local law draft and enacted. So what does that sort of really entail? That all sounds easy enough, right? So we've found that on trying to get local laws passed, the best place to start with this is very town-specific groups, groups with multi-town groups or groups significantly composed of forces from outside the community are perceived as outsiders, as not having, despite the fact we're all interconnected, there's this sense of really having the local people in the town being the one driving the local effort. So trying to come up with, even if it's a subset of a larger group that you might have, having a real local group. And then, well, what do? You sort of are getting ready, you think you can get a group put together. What are you going to do with your group? The most response that our local groups here have found, and other ones we've worked with across the state, is in hosting various educational forums. Part of this is to keep your group motivated. You often feel like you're preaching to the choir, but that actually serves a purpose. For many people, going to meetings, even if it's with people that are of the like mind, sort of gets them energized and continuing to be able to work on the cause. So it's not entirely a loss when it's the same people that show up. But you also are able to, with these, particularly if you extract commitments from people, to get people to commit to bring other people, and when new people do show up, to jump on them. When we were at the Dryden Town Board meeting, and unexpectedly a young man got up, talked about how they selected Dryden to live in because of zoning, because this was a place he wanted to raise his family. We didn't let him leave the room without getting his email address. And he's on their core committee now, and they really worked to sort of incorporate and get these new voices involved. So you have to try to do that. You think you're going to just get the same old people, and then you get some new people, and you get them. So posting educational flyers around Tompkins County, tcgasmap.org, run by the Paducas here, put together some great posters, gas drilling coming to a town near you, with a nasty picture and some basic facts, and that really helped to raise awareness, because there are people that just live in their own sort of cocoon, and without sort of repeated hammering of there's an issue, you're not going to get them to pay attention. So, and then whenever you do get new people, and even amongst your group, developing contact lists and being able to reach people is really important. So now you have your group, you've hosted some forums, you think you have some pretty good support in your town. What are you going to do next? How are you going to drive this local ban through your town board? So what communities, the successful communities here, have either done petitioning, phone surveys, or mail surveys. And in either option starts with obtaining the voter registration list from your local board of elections, trying to obtain, cross-referencing that in some cases with the property assessment records, but oftentimes people do rely on the voter registration list, even though that's not a comprehensive list of everyone in your town. It's people that vote, and that's what's going to be important to your town board members. Collecting some information on how many votes it took to win the last town board election. And in many communities, that's the target for how many signatures you want to get. A subtle way of saying, we have enough people to elect you, or your opponent, if you don't support what we want to do. But this isn't just a minority. This is the same number of people that put you sitting where you are today that are on our side. So having a form petition, so the basic idea here is short and sweet, trying to really identify what it is that you want to have happen. It doesn't have to be many petitions seek to ban high-volume horizontal hydrofracking. As a legal matter, a town cannot specify with that degree of particularity the activity to be banned. They have to go for a broader, less targeted approach. But there's no reason why the petition can't say what it is the people want, and then the town board figures out how to accomplish what it is the people want. If you're unhappy with your local Boy Scout, group is not doing what you like, and the town's renting out the facilities to them, you can say, have a petition that asks for the Boy Scouts to not be able to rent the town park or whatever. They may not, the town isn't going to necessarily pass that specific of a law. They're going to pass a, anti-discrimination law. We won't lease out our facilities to groups that discriminate against different people. So there's no reason that the petition has to be tied precisely to what the law is going to look like. It's simply a demonstration of community support. And these aren't, there is no referendum type right in the state of New York. These are not legal documents. Oftentimes, just because questions will come up, people will sign the petition as they're collecting signatures as the witness to that, and that can come up. There has been at least one case of someone claiming, some kid came by and pressured me to sign this, petition, and they were from out of town, and it was my elderly parent. You could go back and look and say, well, no, this was a single community member who's lived in the town for a long time. Like, that's not the case. So, but that's not a legal requirement. Selecting who your canvases are going to be, assigning areas of responsibility, having check-ins, regularly meeting to check on your goals and where you are, so there's a pressure for people to come back with their signatures. Figuring out your educational materials, there are examples of this. Different towns that have already done this have terrific resources that you can select from. And then it has been very important when you're out selecting, when you actually take the time and effort to canvass, to talk to your neighbors, to find out where people are, to get contact information and permission to call or contact those people, and to make personal notes on the level of commitment. Is this somebody that you think will come to meetings? Is this somebody that's going to be willing to write a letter to the editor? Is this somebody who's going to support you but isn't really, doesn't want to hear from you again? They're busy, they've got 5 kids, and, their husband went AWOL. So trying to figure out sort of what level of commitment you have from different people. So for the people that are motivated, you keep a record of who they are, and you're able to go back and call on them when you need to. And then the final step is inputting all that into a database so you can show to your town board the geographic spread of your petitioning efforts, that this isn't just the village or the new people or small landowners, to try to get a broad cross-section to show, it's men, it's women, it's Republicans, it's Democrats, et cetera, to be able to run some analysis on that. And again, there's support out there to teach people how to do that. So the other option is surveys, which can be done either by mail or phone. This is quicker, although you're less likely to get as good a response level, so it'll be harder to reach your desired target numbers because people aren't going to answer the phone, they're not going to want to talk to you, or they're not going to send back a mail card. But similar process, getting the list, coming up with a script, finding people to make the calls, and keeping track of the results. So once you've done all this, once you've formed your group, held your educational events, gone out, done your petitioning and surveying, now it's time to go and present the results to your local board and have your ask, the request for passage of a local law. So you want to have these meetings well attended. You want to secure commitments from people to come. You don't want to just send out email blasts. You want specific phone calls to people confirming what they're going to say, that they're going to come, when they're going to come, and reminders to. And phone calls are really the only way to get this personal level of commitment so you ensure that you pack the room. And people have different, there's going to be additional hearings, so they'll try to figure out, well, we only want, the room seats 40. We don't really need more than 45 people at this room. We want it to be standing room, but we don't need to have 100 people show up. And so they'll figure out how to get sort of precisely that amount of people there, saving some people, to come to additional board meetings so that it's not the same faces all the time, and trying to have a variety of community members come to these meetings. The old guard, the new guard, young teachers, the old mayor, from years ago, a wide variety of people across the spectrum in the community to show, again, that this isn't a single, this issue doesn't appeal to just a single demographic, that this is a wide body of people in the town. and then offering assistance to the town to, instead of, one option is to take a very adversarial approach with your town board, which is not usually successful and will only work if you're taking Chip Northrop's advice about throwing the board out and you want to get them on record that they're not going to support you, and you want to do that before the election. But otherwise, trying to be cooperative, that everyone's in this together, offering assistance, offering to hold educational meetings, offering to help educate the board on why they can do this. And it's important to try to identify a champion on the board, somebody that's going to work with you, keep you posted, let you know the inside scoop, what the relationships are on the board, who to appeal to, what sort of arguments are going to appeal to different people, and trying to really tailor your arguments and your presentation and timing to the board as well as you can, to understand the other issues in front of the board, to try to offer, you understand that it's really important that they get the dog catcher's, contract done, and you know that, but you really, really think your issue is pretty important too. By the way, you have 1,600 signatures, which is exactly how many people elected them, and you'd like to get some attention. So trying to figure out the board and working with them can be very important, and it takes a little bit of time, and particularly for people who aren't involved in local board meetings, haven't paid too much attention to town politics. This can really be a real educational experience. So then your next step is overcoming objections. There are going to be, in almost all cases, one or two or maybe 3, 4, or 5 people on your board that just either don't think you can do this or don't want to do it for a variety of reasons. So this will require some educational presentations, sharing legal opinions with them. We've put out a memo on the preemption issue, which is this idea that the state has said you can't regulate the industry, and some people have interpreted that to mean that you cannot use zoning and land use that would simply prohibit an activity that but in fact, the courts in New York have said that land use regulations are not a regulation of the operation and process of a business, and therefore you can, in the context of a number of other industries and statutes, have said this doesn't mean a prohibition on regulation is not a prohibition on zoning and land use police type powers. So we've issued an opinion on that. The attorneys for the town of Middlefield here in New York have issued an opinion on that, and that's posted on the town of Middlefield's website. And yesterday, we gave a presentation at the Associations of Towns, a Marcellus Shale workshop, and their counsel and Whiteman, Hannum, and Osterman's counsel, who are the people working with Delta Engineering on the road use agreement, both said that they agreed with our analysis that you're not preempted on local land use type restrictions on drilling. So here's a slide from that presentation. Hard to read, but basically the attorney for Whiteman, Osterman, and Hanna goes through and says, here's what I predict. Municipalities are going to adopt zoning laws. The gas drilling industry is going to challenge these prohibitions. The courts will likely construe preemption in the same way it construed preemption in these other cases, and will likely uphold municipal home rule powers, and local governments will be allowed to enact zoning laws completely prohibiting gas drilling as a land use in certain districts. And that then, as they did in the mining context, the legislature will amend the zoning, or amend this preemption provision in the environmental conservation law to precisely reflect the limits of local zoning powers. But it was incredibly gratifying at a sort of the opposite of this sort of meeting. Tons of people opposed to local control, crossed arms, unhappy people, representatives from a number of town boards across the state hearing precisely what they did not want to hear. So we enjoyed that very much. So you've made you're making your presentation to your board. How are you going to get media coverage for this? And getting media coverage is really important. You want to develop a press contact list, put out a media advisory ahead of time so that, because most of the local papers are really short-staffed, they need to know in advance to try to get somebody out to your event. Develop press releases, basically write the story for the paper, include quotes and have that sort of ready to go, perhaps even issued under a press embargo ahead of time, so that you have your best chance of getting this story in the paper. And then soliciting from your support group, from your contact group, and hopefully from people who aren't sort of perceived as the local agitators behind this, but get a variety of people in the community to write letters to the editors, guest viewpoints, and the like, and have those in the local paper. All of this because, again, it really helps for people to see this multiple times and to really sort of sink into people's heads what's going on. So we get a lot of questions about conflict of interest. You know, my local town board members are against home rule, or they have a lease, or I think that they just don't like me because, you know, I ran against them 10 years ago. You know, what's a conflict of interest? So the state law is very, very specific, and it really only focuses when people use their town office to enter into contracts with themselves or family members. So you give the snow plowing contract, you know, for the school to your brother-in-law, you know, those sorts of very specific, you know, tremendous abuses of power. And they don't address at all at the state level these more sort of fundamental conflicts of interest. They leave that to the local boards, the local town boards, village boards, to enact their own code of ethics. And it's mandatory that towns enact these code of ethics, but often, despite the fact they're supposed to be posted in the town, they're supposed to be distributed every year to all people on the town boards, it's often difficult to even find the code of ethics in your town. It might take a couple weeks. They have to look under the bottom of filing cabinets, behind the old desk, and they'll pull out their non-word processed, you know, typed on a typewriter, coffee stains on it. Here's our only copy of our code of ethics, and you can tell it's pretty well read. And so, but you need to get a copy of that, and then your town probably doesn't, but could potentially have a conflicts of interest, or a board of ethics board, but given the fact that most communities can't even find their code of ethics, it's unlikely that they have a town board on this. But most counties do have a board of ethics, and you can petition them. Well, it depends on the rules of the Board of Ethics, sort of whether individuals can petition the county board, whether it has to be other town board members and the like. But unfortunately, there aren't any great rules on this. You've really got to go and investigate at your local level what the prohibitions are. So what's the standard the Court of Appeals has held, which is nice, that we do as the public have a right to be assured that our officials are using their best judgment without self-interest or partiality, and particularly if a matter is controversial. So there is sort of state common law out there saying you're not supposed to have conflicts of interest, but trying to get that dealt with at your town board level, again, can be a problem. The courts have also found that simply owning particularly large amounts of land in these sort of land use contexts is not enough, that someone without a lease who wants to lease but isn't sort of the head of a landowner coalition or something like that, that's probably not going to be a conflict of interest. Again, this is a Court of Appeals, highest court in the state of New York, has said everybody basically in the town owns land, or almost everyone, so to preclude or make decisions saying someone has a conflict simply because they own land is not enough. But if they have an interest that's different from the rest of the community, if there's some sort of financial interest for them that is peculiar to them, they have a personal financial interest, they already have a lease, or there's only one person who's the head of the landowner coalition and they're on your town board, that's a very peculiar interest. That's not one shared by everyone else in the community. So those are more likely to be found to be conflicts of interest. So yeah, you've now just qualified 3 people on your board, and now you want to get your town law passed. Well, unfortunately, the quorum laws still require that you get the full number of votes that you needed, which if you have county approval on your referral process as part of the town law, town zoning amendment, you need 3 votes. And if the county disapproves a zoning amendment, you need a supermajority, which is 4 votes, and you need that regardless of the number of people that have been disqualified. So if you disqualify 2, you still need all 3 of the other people to vote for your town law. So you can keep a bad law from getting passed, but you can't disqualify half your board and then just have 1 out of the 2 remaining people vote for a law and say, well, that was a majority, and now we have a law that 1 person passed. So again, to the extent you're going to have a lot of people on a town board that have conflicts of interest, the real thing that has to happen there is getting new town board members. So how are you going to get a local law drafted? You can request the town board. So the first thing to do after you've presented your petition, sort of your main ask, is for the town board to pass a resolution to move forward with drafting a proposed local law, and then designating in that resolution who's going to draft it, and hopefully, if the town board is willing to remember that its town attorney works for it, give that town attorney a deadline to turn in a proposed law. But it doesn't have to be drafted by the town attorney. Some towns don't have sufficient money for this. Citizen groups can work with outside lawyers to do this. Groups in Otsego County, Otsego 2000 has funded lawyers to work with towns. Board members who are attorneys can draft the law, and then we're also working with a number of towns, and as we've said, we work for free. We will work with towns that are in a position to actually get these sort of resolutions passed. We'll work with the town board to get such a local law passed. So what's your local law going to look like? It can be an amendment to zoning if you have zoning. It can be a standalone prohibition if you don't have zoning through general police powers. Or you can enact a moratorium to allow for time to adopt either of those, to the extent that what you impose the moratorium on is something you had the right to do in the first place. There are some moratoriums out there that say, well, the town board is prohibited from issuing any permit that authorizes high-volume horizontal hydrofracking. Well, the town didn't have the right to issue a permit about high-volume horizontal hydrofracking in the first place. That's an operation or process. You're prohibited from that. And so you want to look at zoning amendments for high industrial uses. You want to look at zoning amendments to ban gas drilling, but you don't want to get particular in that moratorium identifying high-volume horizontal hydrofracking. So what's a local law have to look like? The most important thing about what a local law looks like is that it has to be based on local concerns. It can't be that you simply think the state is stupid. And that's not a good enough reason. So you have to say, we agree, state, you're totally right. Natural gas drilling is wonderful, just not here. We think in our town we have adopted a land use plan and we don't have space for industrial uses, and we have a shallow gravel aquifer, and we don't have the infrastructure with the roads, and we are dependent on agriculture, and we don't have an emergency response team. And, we have a lot of schools or hospitals or nursing homes in our town, or people come here because of the clean air. We have a tourism economy, educational economy, and these are inconsistent with large-scale industry. So it has to be local impacts that you're focused on. So where are we across the state on this? Camillus adopted a gas drilling ban some time ago, actually, with not a lot of fanfare, and isn't on a lot of people's lists. They sort of did this a while ago. Wales adopted a ban, although it's based on it's perhaps not legally enforceable. It's based on the rights of nature and affirmatively disagreeing with the state and telling the state that basically they're going to secede from the state if the state tries to tell them what to do, which is all terrific from an empowerment and feeling like you're sticking it to the state and you're standing up for your town, but you're not going to win that in the courts. It's going to require a constitutional amendment at the federal level, and we have seen sort of how the ERA and other proposed constitutional amendments, how that process has worked. So that's going to be a long time in coming. It'll create some debate, If they lose that, if somebody sues the town of Wales and they lose that, there'll be some uproar. What do you mean people don't have the right to self-determination in their own town? Unfortunately, you don't have that right in the United States. There's no inherent local power. You only have what the state gives you, and which is unfortunate, but if you're trying to actually stop drilling now in your town, our approach is to work within the current legal structure and not try to change the Constitution to get what we want. We're trying to do this in a way, some would say, well, you've been co-opted, you're doing what the man wants. Well, I don't want drilling so badly that if what it takes is sort of doing this in a very precise way, I'm fine with that. We are fine with that. So Middlefield, Otsego, and Springfield have enacted local prohibitions. A whole bunch of towns are working on this. Presently haven't actually passed anything, but there is a movement across the state to try to get this done. So that's very exciting, and we're very pleased to be part of that, to be influencing this debate at the state level here. And so I don't know if anyone has any questions, if we're doing questions and answers, but thank you very much. So, yes, Wes.
Do you have any industry lawsuits against these 5 communities yet? And even if you don't, I'm going to answer the spectrum.
So the question is, are there any lawsuits pending? And if there aren't, to speculate about that. There are no lawsuits pending because there has to be a case in controversy before you can bring a lawsuit, typically. So you'd have to have a permit from the DEC to do the sort of gas drilling that you wanted to in a town that had passed a prohibition. And then either the gas company would totally ignore the town law and just try to go ahead and drill, and hopefully the town would bring a lawsuit seeking an injunction to stop the drilling, or the gas company might say, we recognize there's a local ban, we don't believe in it, but we're going to bring a lawsuit seeking a judgment, a declaratory judgment, which is basically a lawsuit where the court says what the law should be. It's not a money judgment, so it's a declaratory judgment, basically a declaration, a decision about whether the law is valid or not. So those sorts of lawsuits will ultimately come. They might be more likely to come in Otsego County, where they're drilling in non-shale formations and using sort of modified high-volume horizontal hydrofracking, but not necessarily techniques that fall under the new draft supplemental. So, and again, our theory on those lawsuits is precisely what Whiteman, Hanna, and Osterman said, that those lawsuits will be brought, and that we believe the towns, if they've passed a law that sort of follows all the rules, that, they've complied with seeker, they've enacted sort of local, it's based on local concerns, et cetera, that the towns will win those lawsuits. That doesn't mean that's going to be free, but there's a lot of community support, both at the town level. There are towns that understand that that's something they're going to have to fund, and that it's peanuts compared to what fixing all their roads or decreased property values, what that's going to look like. And there are foundations that are willing to support some of the legal costs, and then even groups. One town that we're working with has like 2,000 people total. A guy spent 2 days, just called some people off the top, that he knew, and collected $12,000 in pledges towards defending a lawsuit. So we're up to 54,000 in a town of 2,000 people. So there's a fair amount of community support. So Chris?
Yes, I'm awfully tired. So my question has to do with due process.
Yes.
And I noticed when you were talking, you gave the range of prohibition could be heavy industrial or could be gas drilling, but you couldn't be specific on the mode of drilling, like horizontal hydrofracking, because that would be construed as regulation. I was at a town board meeting recently, and the town attorney brought up the issue of due process. Now, I'm trying to follow his legal thought.
Me too.
All right. So I'm trying to get some clarification on this. The way I understand it is his feeling was that if you had a prohibition on heavy industry, that could affect, and I'm paraphrasing a lot, I mean, I'm trying to read into this, that could affect a lot of people. And maybe you don't know what all the implications are, and so I guess it's sort of like you don't want to leave any stone unturned or something. But I would just want to see if you had any clarification on this issue of due process that this town attorney raised.
Sure. So due process is a constitutional provision, federal constitutional provision, and there's sort of two arms of due process: procedural due process and substantive due process. And you really had to pay attention in law school to remember this 20 years later. Luckily for us, David did. But the main idea is that you have to be, what your town lawyer is getting at is the idea that you have to be on notice as to what activities are prohibited in a town. You can't have a law that's so vague that someone doesn't know what's prohibited. They do the prohibited thing and they get in trouble, and they had no idea that what they did was prohibited. So that, I think, is the sort of due process concern that he's getting at. And I mean, we believe that that's why it's important, if you use the high-impact industrial activity definition, to have very clear definitions of what that means. And that's why in our proposed ordinance, there are pages of definitions that get at that. The fact that there could be something that falls under those definitions that you haven't thought of yet or hasn't even happened yet, hasn't been invented, that's not the issue. The issue is whether someone can go and read what's prohibited and figure out if a particular activity falls into those definitions. And they're relatively straightforward. There's talk about construction of 2 acres or more of impervious surface. And impervious is defined, in the statute, so that's pretty clear. Clearing of, clear cutting of a certain area, and clear cutting's defined, and the surface area is pretty clear. Fossil fuel electric generators of more than X horsepower, relatively straightforward to figure out if you have that or you don't have that. The need to construct infrastructure of pipelines and, have this sort of large-scale build-out, relatively easy to figure out if you have that or not. So we believe, and that's why there's some town boards that really want to have something simple and 2 pages long, and that doesn't take a long time to read. If you simply said high-impact industrial activities are prohibited and you didn't define anything, that would be pretty vague. But we're not suggesting that. We have we've spent a lot of time, we continue to sort of refine those definitions and to make sure that that's as tight as possible. So while that can be a concern, we don't believe in, if properly drafted, that would be a concern. Many zoning ordinances actually have relatively vague descriptions of what's prohibited, and they rely on ordinary dictionary definitions and the like. So there are instances where a zoning ordinance can be found to be violative of due process because it's too vague, but we don't believe that our proposal meets that definition.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
You clarified that well.
Maybe this relates to Chris's question, but do you know if any of the towns who have passed laws so far have permitted pipeline development, gas drilling, oil drilling, those kinds of things in the past? And if so, wouldn't that, sort of challenge their prohibiting them in the future?
So the question, although I think it'll show up, is can you, if you've allowed these sorts of developments in the past, pipelines, oil and gas drilling, can you change your mind and prohibit it? And the answer is yes. You can't take away someone's vested rights. So if someone either has a pre-existing non-conforming use, now non-conforming use, it was legal at the time and now you've made it so that it's not legal, they have a right to continue that activity. You can't just take that away from them. Although you can impose amortization periods and have some limitations on their ability to expand that, with some exceptions. Dumps and gravel mines often, they have a right to expand because it's a consumptive land use. So if you own 100 acres, you have a 10-acre mine, they'll say, well, the idea was that you were always going to mine those other 90 acres because that's the only reason why you owned them. You were going to consume them as your business continued. So there are some exceptions, but as a general matter, you can limit a non-conforming use to its current use, it's the current state of its use, and you can, in some instances, actually require that use be phased out over time. And as long as you have a rational basis for your new decision that, so if you lived in a zone that was entirely industrialized, you lived in Texas and there were wells on every corner and compressor stations and gathering pipelines, you might have a hard time to say, well, we want to protect our community character because the community character is gone. And given the limits on sort of local action, you might be able to still say, well, we're concerned about air pollution, and there's a lot of methane emissions and particulate emissions and truck traffic and dust being torn up, and we don't want any more. Yes, we have a lot of this, but we're done. We're drawing the line, and our community is finished with this. And there are plenty of cases in New York where communities had allowed gravel mining and decided they weren't going to allow it anymore, and the only question was what to do with the existing non-conforming uses, or cases where people had a permit and had bought land and made substantial expenditures, hadn't yet opened their mine, but were intending to. And you run into some questions in those cases, but nobody new can come in and buy land or try to get permits and say the zoning doesn't apply, which is part of the reason why it's important to do this sooner rather than later. The sooner a town passes a town law and has it in place, the fewer potential pre-existing non-conforming uses there will be, because they'll be prohibited before they get started.
Can I please ask a question? I had my hand up before.
Oh, yeah, sure.
The city of Ithaca, and thanks to you and David, have worked hard in trying to help pass a ban in the city of Ithaca, correct, if I'm saying it wrong? And it's sitting on Dan Hoffman's desk. And I'm becoming very, very frustrated because I really believe that bans work. And I think the fact that the city of Ithaca is sitting on that, it's not helping other communities come forward. I think if we had bans throughout the state, that would help create a state ban. And I would like to know why that's not happening. If you have any updated information, why the city is not doing it. I mean, tonight we heard somebody from the industry say to us, this is not even the right place to drill because of our geological makeup. So to me, I mean, it's unbelievable that we're even in this situation. So the more reason why the city of Ithaca can't pass a ban. And I'm also frustrated because I don't see anybody going to Common Council asking for it.
So, okay. So I don't know sort of what the city attorney in Ithaca is thinking, but the answer to sort of how to get that moving is to apply pressure to the city council and to have citizens of the city go to meetings and ask the questions you're asking, and not just one person, but to have a number of people.
But this is the frustration I feel, because nobody's doing that except me. And we're all here tonight. Why can't we all go to City Hall in Ithaca, New York, and say we want this ban to go through that's sitting on a desk?
Well, it really needs to be people from the city, and we have a bunch of other questions. But, I mean, the idea is to get people from the city to go to those meetings and ask those questions. I mean, that's what's got to happen, is getting the people from the city organized and out and attending those meetings. Peter.
So with these town bans, many of them are focusing on drilling in general, and I'm thinking I'm hearing you say that it's easier to prohibit drilling in general than it is to prohibit a specific type of drilling, namely shale gas drilling, which was our initial concern. Is that true?
So, yes, you can't specify formations or how deep or what process is used in drilling. You can either prohibit drilling outright, and you would require some sort of local analysis. In the town of Middlefield, which I believe other towns could use as a basis for adopting their own findings, you'd have to have some findings that both sort of 40-acre spacing, traditional vertical wells were inconsistent with your comprehensive plan, as well as, these 640-acre spaces. So if you did that sort of analysis, a local land use analysis, finding problems with sort of drilling at both ends of the spectrum, you could prohibit drilling entirely. Our approach, the high-impact industrial use approach, focuses more on the negative externalities that arise from surface runoff, from creation of impervious surfaces, the loss of trees from clear cutting, the particulate emissions from truck traffic, the particulate emissions from diesel, and says based on these negative impacts, an activity that meets these criteria, generates these sort of impacts, is prohibited. And that would allow gas drilling that didn't have those negative externalities. If they could come in with fairy dust and extract the gas, they wouldn't be prohibited, whereas they would presumably be prohibited even if they could do it with fairy dust in those other towns. So one approach is to identify very specifically what the impacts are. This other approach is to analyze sort of drilling as a whole and how that would impact your town, and say even vertical drilling is not acceptable in our town.
What about the standalone police power prohibition? Do you not need a comprehensive plan for that?
Right. So the zoning power is a subset of the police power. The general authority that towns have is based on the police power to protect the health, safety, and welfare of their residents. And that doesn't have to be through zoning. You can have a sanitary code, you could have a prohibition on junkyards in your town, you could have a local air pollution law, you could have a local noise ordinance that are all standalone laws that protect the health, safety, and welfare of your community without using zoning. And the hallmark of zoning is dividing a town into districts and allowing certain uses in some districts but not others. So while you could have a zoning prohibition in your town against gas drilling that said it's not allowed in residential areas but it is allowed in agricultural areas, if you could show some reason for that, you couldn't do that sort of dividing up of proposed or permitted uses with an overall police power. That has to be done through comprehensive planning and the zoning power. But if, on the other hand, you prohibit zoning or you prohibit a particular use based on health, safety, and welfare impacts in your town, then you can adopt a police power ordinance without zoning, without a comprehensive plan, without necessarily county review. You have to follow very precise notice and hearing requirements, as you do even with zoning, and you have to have particular sorts of findings if you're using the police power that are different from the zoning, because you're not trying to tie this back to your comprehensive plan. You're trying to tie it to health, safety, and welfare impacts. So it wouldn't be a Middlefield type analysis where you look and say, this is inconsistent with our zoning. You'd look and your idea would be to say this is inconsistent with the health, safety, and welfare of our residents.
So absent a comprehensive plan, the police power, standalone police power, would be much quicker. Is that true?
It wouldn't be quicker. It just politically might be. There are towns that zoning's a communist word, and they don't want to hear zoning, talk about zoning. You mention zoning, they're not going to pass it. A police power ordinance, that was sounding pretty Soviet to me, is not zoning and is potentially more politically palatable in certain towns. Yes. All right, so thank you very much.